The sky above Vetha 4 had always been gentle. Soft purple clouds drifted slowly over green hills, and the twin suns painted everything in warm golden light. It was a quiet world, a peaceful world. The Ruvani had chosen it for exactly that reason. They were a small species. Thin bones, hollow like a bird's, covered in soft feathers of white and pale blue. Their voices were musical, their movements graceful, and their history was completely free of war. The Ruvani had never built a weapon. They had never needed one. For 300 years, their colony on Vetha 4 had been a place of science and learning, home to 12,000 souls who studied the stars and the soil and the strange crystals that grew deep beneath the mountains. But today, the sky was not gentle. Today, the sky was full of ships. Elder Pashu stood at the wide window of the colony's central tower and watched them come. 200 warships, black and jagged, dropping out of faster-than-light travel one after another, like stones falling into still water. Each one was enormous. Each one was covered in weapons. The symbol on their hulls was a clenched fist wrapped in chains, the mark of the Gorvathi Dominion. Pashu's old hands trembled. His feathers, once bright, had faded to gray with age. He had lived long enough to know what the Gorvathi wanted. The rare minerals beneath the mountains, the crystals that powered advanced technology across the galaxy. Vetha 4 was sitting on a fortune, and the Ruvani had no army to protect it. The communication screen behind him crackled to life. A face appeared, broad, scaled, with deep-set yellow eyes and a mouth full of short, sharp teeth. Warlord Drenak of the Gorvathi Dominion stared out from the screen with the calm confidence of a predator who had already won. "Elder," Drenak said, his voice low and rough, "you know why I am here. Surrender your colony. Hand over the mineral rights. Order your people to cooperate, and I will allow them to leave alive. You have 6 hours." The screen went dark. Pashu closed his eyes. 6 hours. 12,000 people. No weapons, no shields, no warships. He turned to the young Ruvani standing behind him, Ambassador Lyothi, the colony's diplomatic liaison. She was younger than most, her feathers still a bright silver blue, but her eyes were sharp, and her mind was faster than anyone Pashu had ever known. "Contact the cooperative," Pashu said quietly. "Tell them what is happening. Tell them we need help immediately." Lyothi nodded and moved quickly to the communication hub, buried deep beneath the colony. She spent the next 2 hours sending messages to every member species of the Galactic Cooperative. She described the situation clearly. She sent coordinates, sensor data, everything they would need to respond. The replies came slowly, and each one broke her heart a little more. The Valori expressed deep concern and promised to raise the issue at the next council session in 3 weeks. The Dumi sent their sympathies, but explained that their fleet was committed elsewhere. The Arathi suggested filing a formal territorial dispute with the cooperative's legal division. Processing time, 6 to 8 months. Nobody was coming. Lyothe sat in the cold underground room, surrounded by blinking screens and the hum of machines, and felt something she had never felt before. Despair. Complete, total despair. 12,000 of her people were going to die or be enslaved, and the galaxy was going to watch it happen and write reports about it afterward. She contacted Elder Pashu and told him. The old Ruvani was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "There is one more option," he said, "the Deathworld frequency band." Lyothe's feathers tightened against her body. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Deathworld frequency band. It was a set of communication channels monitored by the species that had evolved on the most dangerous, hostile, violent planets in the galaxy. Worlds with crushing gravity, extreme weather, massive predators, and toxic environments. The species that survived those worlds were strong, aggressive, and deeply unpredictable. The cooperative kept them at arm's length. They were considered too dangerous for normal diplomacy. The most infamous of all the Deathworld species was humanity. Evolved on a planet called Earth, a world of earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, and predators that hunted in packs. Fighting their world, fighting each other, and now, fighting among the stars. They were the galaxy's nightmare. Strong, fast, adaptable, and absolutely relentless. No civilized species called the Deathworlders for help. It was like inviting a fire to save you from the cold. "Do it," Pashu said. "Send the signal." Leothe's hands shook as she adjusted the transmitter. She aimed the broadcast wide. Every frequency, every band, including the restricted channels that reached into human-monitored space. She did not write a formal diplomatic request. She did not follow protocol. She simply spoke from the heart. "This is Vetha 4. We are 12,000 civilians. We have no weapons. We are going to die. If anyone hears this, please." Then she sat back and stared at the ceiling, certain that she had just screamed into an empty void. She was wrong. 14 light-years away, aboard a small listening station orbiting a dead moon, Lieutenant Bei Sunho was halfway through a boring night shift when his console lit up. He almost ignored it. The Deathworld frequency band picked up garbage signals all the time. Old echoes, automated beacons, cosmic noise. But something about this one made him stop. He played it back. A voice, thin, trembling, afraid. 12,000 civilians, no weapons, going to die. Sunho sat up straight. He played it again. Then a third time. His chest felt tight. He checked the coordinates. Vetha 4, frontier space. He cross-referenced the signal with known species databases. Ruvani, a peaceful species, no military whatsoever. He forwarded the signal to Fleet Command with a Priority 1 tag and a single note. Confirmed civilian distress. Immediate response recommended. The signal climbed the chain of command in minutes. It reached the desk of Admiral Yoon Jisoo at 0347 hours, Earth Standard Time. She was already awake. She read the report once. She listened to the signal once. She stood up from her chair, walked to her command console, and entered a code that had not been used in 4 years. Fleet Order, Crimson 7, full combat mobilization. Across human space, alarms began to sound. On stations, on bases, on ships docked, and ships patrolling. 142 warships of the 9th Expeditionary Warfleet received the orders simultaneously. Engines that had been idling roared to full power. Crews scrambled to battle stations. Weapon systems came online. Admiral Jisoo looked at the star map on her screen. Vetha 4 blinked like a tiny heartbeat in the darkness of space. She pressed the fleet-wide communication button and spoke calmly. "All ships, set course for Vetha 4. Maximum speed. We have people to save." And across the cold black emptiness between the stars, 142 warships turned as one and jumped to light speed. 48 hours had passed since the Gorvathi arrived, and Vetha 4 had already changed. The soft green hills were scarred with landing tracks from heavy troop transports. The research buildings had been broken into and searched. Equipment was smashed. Data drives were stolen. The beautiful central garden, where Ruvani children had once played among crystal flowers, was now a staging ground for Gorvathi soldiers. The colonists had been gathered, all 12,000 of them, men, women, children, elders, pushed into 3 large containment zones, surrounded by armed guards and energy fences. They huddled together in the open air, their thin feathers doing little to protect them from the cold night winds. Some of the children were crying. Most of the adults had stopped. Elder Pasu had tried to negotiate. He had walked up to Warlord Drenak with his back straight and his voice steady and asked for mercy. He asked for medical supplies for the injured. He asked for time. Drenak had listened with a bored expression. Then he had reached out, grabbed Pashu's left wing arm, and snapped it like a dry stick. The crack echoed across the containment zone. Pashu fell to the ground, gasping in pain, and Drenak leaned down close to his face. "You have nothing I want, except what is under the ground," Drenak said. "Do not waste my time again." Deep beneath the colony, Ambassador Liathi sat alone in the communication hub. The room was dark, except for the glow of screens. She had been broadcasting her SOS on a loop for 2 days straight. No one had replied. Not the Cooperative, not the Deathworlders, not anyone. She had started recording. Video messages, testimonies. She pointed her camera at the surveillance feeds that still worked, and documented everything. The containment zones, the broken buildings, the soldiers. She recorded Pashu's broken arm. She recorded the children crying. She spoke into the camera with a steady voice, even though her hands would not stop shaking. "This is Ambassador Liothe of the Ruvani colony on Vetha 4. This is day 2 of the Gorvathi occupation. I am recording this so that someone, someday, will know what happened here." She saved each recording carefully. Then she went back to broadcasting, calling into the dark, hoping. In orbit above the planet, Warlord Drenak sat on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Fang, and felt satisfied. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. His engineers were already surveying the mineral deposits. The colonists were under control. The Galactic Cooperative had done nothing, just as he had predicted. The Ruvani were alone, and they were his. His sensor officer made a small sound. Drenak glanced over. "What is it?" The officer hesitated. "A ripple, Warlord, in the spacefold layer. Probably nothing. An echo from our own arrival." Drenak grunted and turned back to his reports. Then another officer spoke up, her voice less certain. "Another ripple, larger this time." Then another, and another. Drenak stood up slowly. The main display screen showed the space around Vetha 4, the planet below, its 200 ships in orbit, and beyond them, the empty blackness of open space. Except it was not empty anymore. Points of light were appearing. 1, 5, 10, 20, 50. "What is that?" Drenak's voice was low and dangerous. The sensor officer's scales had gone pale. "Ships, Warlord. Incoming. Fast light exit signatures. They are everywhere." 142 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a single, perfect formation. They appeared between the Gorvathi fleet and the planet, like a wall of steel and fire. They were not like Gorvathi ships. They were not elegant, like Velari ships, or smooth, like Dumi ships. They were ugly, angular, brutal, built for one purpose and one purpose only: war. The flagship led the formation, the Iron Wake. It was a dreadnought, massive, dark gray, covered in weapon systems that the Gorvathi sensors struggled to classify. Railguns, missile batteries, energy lance arrays, point defense systems, things the Gorvathi had no names for. On the bridge of the Iron Wake, Captain Han Do-hyun stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked at the main screen. He could see the Gorvathi fleet. He could see the planet below, scarred and occupied. He could see the containment zones on the surface. His expression did not change, but his eyes were hard. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies." His communication officer nodded. "Channel open, Captain." His voice carried across every frequency in the system, to the Gorvathi fleet, to the colony below, to Liothe in her underground room, and to every long-range sensor listening from systems away. "This is Captain Han Do-hyun of the United Earth Space Force vessel Iron Wake, flagship of the 9th Expeditionary War Fleet. We have received a civilian distress signal from this world. You will stop all hostile operations immediately. You will withdraw your ground forces. You will leave this system. You have 10 minutes. In the underground communication hub, Ambassador Leothi heard the message through her speakers and froze. She played it back. A human voice. Calm. Polite. Absolutely certain. She looked at her surface cameras. Through the clouds, she could see them. Lights in the sky. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Human warships. She covered her mouth with both hands and sobbed. On the bridge of the Iron Fang, Warlord Drenak stared at the sensor display and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. But he was a warlord of the Gorvathi Dominion. He had conquered 11 worlds. He did not show fear. Humans, he said with a sneer. One species, one fleet. I'd have 200 ships. Sub-Commander Olka stood beside him, her claws tapping nervously against her console. Warlord, these are Deathworlders. Their combat record. Numbers win wars, Drenak interrupted. Not reputation. He opened a return channel and laughed into it. Captain, I admire your courage, but you are outnumbered. Leave now and I will let you go. Stay and I will add your fleet to my collection. 10 minutes passed. Drenak did not move his ships. Aboard the Iron Wake, Admiral Yoon Jisoo stood behind Captain Do-hyun. She had watched the clock count down in silence. When it reached 0, she looked at Commander Shin Tae-ho, who stood ready at the tactical station. They always think the numbers matter, she said quietly. Then louder, weapons free. The order traveled across the fleet in less than a second. 142 ships received it simultaneously. What happened next took exactly 4 seconds. The Iron Wake's forward railguns fired first. 3 rounds of tungsten moving at a fraction of the speed of light. They hit the Iron Fang's shield generators and tore through them like paper. Before the shields had finished falling, a coordinated volley from 3 destroyers struck the flagship's main cannon array. It exploded in a shower of fire and metal. A millisecond later, a precision energy lance severed the Iron Fang's communication antenna, cutting it off from the rest of the fleet. The most powerful ship in the Gorvathi fleet was blind, silent, and toothless. And the humans had not even scratched the hull. It was not an attack. It was a message. Across the Gorvathi fleet, panic spread like fire. Officers screamed for orders. Ships broke formation. Sensors flooded with targeting locks from human warships that seemed to be everywhere at once. On the Iron Wake, Captain Do-hyun watched the chaos on his screen. He took a slow breath. That was the warning, he said. Now we begin. Space above Vetha 4 had turned into a hell of light and fire. The Gorvathi fleet, still reeling from the opening strike, tried to reorganize. Captains shouted orders. Ships pulled into defensive clusters, grouping together for protection. It was a natural instinct. It was also the worst possible decision against humans. Admiral Yoon Jisoo had studied war since she was 18 years old. She had read every tactical manual ever written on Earth, from ancient naval battles on oceans to modern fleet engagements between stars. She knew exactly what a panicked enemy did, and she knew exactly how to punish it. Wolf pack formation, she ordered. Break them apart. The human fleet split into small, fast groups. 5 destroyers here, 3 frigates there. Each group moved independently, but in perfect coordination. They cut through the gaps between the Gorvathi clusters, isolating ships, disabling engines, and moving on before the enemy could react. It was not a battle. It was a hunt. The Gorvathis fired back. Their weapons were powerful, heavy plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid rock. But they were slow. The human ships moved too fast, changed direction too quickly, and seemed to know where every shot was going before it was fired. Human electronic warfare systems filled the Gorvathi sensors with false signals, ghost ships, and phantom targets. The Gorvathi were shooting at shadows, while the real wolves closed in from every side. On the surface of Vetha 4, things were getting worse. Warlord Drenak had lost contact with his flagship's main systems, but he still had ground communication. He watched the battle through surface sensors and saw his fleet being taken apart piece by piece. Rage burned in his chest, but beneath it was something colder, fear. Sub-Commander Olka approached him carefully. She had always been the smarter of the two, and she could see the truth that Drenak refused to accept. The space battle was already lost. But they still had something the humans wanted. The colonists, Olka said quietly. 12,000 hostages. Wire the containment zones with explosives. Force the humans to negotiate. Drenak stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Within the hour, Gorvathi engineers had placed high-yield charges around all 3 containment zones, enough to kill every Ruvani inside. Drenak opened a broadcast channel and sent his message to the human fleet. Humans, I have 12,000 civilians surrounded by explosives. Withdraw your fleet from this system, or I will kill every single one of them. You have 30 minutes. On the bridge of the Iron Wake, Captain Dohyun listened to the message in silence. His hands, clasped behind his back, tightened until his knuckles went white. Beside him, Lieutenant Bei Sunho pulled up surface scans showing the explosive placements. The charges were real. The threat was real. Admiral Jisoo studied the tactical display for exactly 8 seconds. Then she turned to Commander Shin Taeho. Deploy the Marines. Taeho nodded and opened the Marine channel. Sergeant No Yeren, you are clear for drop. Primary objective, neutralize explosive charges. Secondary objective, secure all containment zones. Tertiary objective, eliminate hostile ground forces. Rules of engagement, protect civilians at all costs. Deep in the belly of the carrier ship Ulsan, Sergeant No Yeren was already suited up. She stood in a narrow lodge bay, surrounded by 29 other Marines, each one locked into a drop pod, a single-person capsule designed to be fired from orbit straight to the planet's surface. It was the most dangerous way to deploy ground forces that anyone had ever invented. The pods had no weapons, no shields, and only basic guidance systems. They were just armored shells wrapped around a human being, falling through the sky like bullets. No other species in the galaxy did this. No other species was crazy enough to try. Yeren checked her squad status on her helmet display. All green. She took a breath, flexed her hands inside her powered aura gauntlets, and spoke into her comm. Listen up. There are 12,000 people down there who have never held a weapon in their lives. They are counting on us, even though they do not know it yet. We are going to drop fast, hit hard, and get those charges disarmed before anyone else dies. Stay sharp, stay together, and do not miss. The launch alarm sounded. 30 pods fired simultaneously, shooting out of the carrier like seeds from a burst fruit. They hit the atmosphere and began to burn. From the ground, they looked like meteors, bright streaks of fire cutting across the purple sky. The Gorvathi soldiers in the containment zones looked up. They had seen many things in their careers as soldiers, but they had never seen enemy troops fall from the sky like burning stars. Some of them took a step back. Others raised their weapons, not sure what they were aiming at. The pods hit the ground with the sound of thunder. Each one buried itself a foot into the soil, then cracked open like an egg. Marines rose from the craters in full-powered armor, heavy, dark gray suits that made them look like metal giants. The armor doubled their strength, tripled their speed, and could stop a plasma bolt at close range. Yeren was the first one moving. She hit the ground running, her boots cracking the earth with every step. Her helmet sensors identified the nearest explosive charge. 200 meters ahead, wired to the east wall of Containment Zone 1. 4 Gorvathi soldiers stood guard nearby. She covered the distance in seconds. The Gorvathi guards saw her coming, a human in full armor, moving faster than anything that heavy should be able to move. The first guard fired his plasma rifle. The bolt hit Yeren's chestplate and splashed off like water on hot metal. She did not slow down. She hit the first guard with her armored fist, and he flew backward into the wall. The second guard tried to run. She caught him by the arm and threw him aside. The other 2 dropped their weapons and surrendered. Yeren knelt beside the explosive charge and began disarming it. Her fingers, guided by her suit's systems, moved with careful precision. Behind her, her squad was spreading across the containment zones, engaging Gorvathi soldiers and reaching the other charges. Plasma fire lit up the night. The sound of boots and gunfire and shouting filled the air. A bolt of plasma hit Yeren's left shoulder. The armor held, but the impact knocked her sideways. Pain shot through her arm. She gritted her teeth, steadied herself, and kept working on the charge. 10 seconds later, it was disarmed. She stood up, turned toward the Gorvathi soldier who had shot her, and raised her rifle. He dropped his weapon immediately. The second wave of pods hit 20 minutes later. This time, they carried medics. Dr. Kwan Hana landed near Containment Zone 2, already barking orders into her comm before her pod had finished opening. She set up emergency medical stations using portable equipment she had carried on her back through the atmosphere. Within minutes, she was treating the wounded. The Ruvani watched in stunned silence as the human doctor moved among them. She was gentle. She spoke softly, even though they could not understand her words at first. She treated broken bones, cleaned wounds, and handed out blankets and water. The children stared at her with wide, dark eyes. Then something happened that no one expected. A wounded Gorvathi soldier was dragged near the medical station by 2 Marines. He was bleeding badly from a leg wound. He looked up at Dr. Kwan with terror in his yellow eyes, expecting to be killed or left to die. Hana knelt beside him and began treating his wound. The Ruvani nearby went quiet. The Gorvathi soldiers stared at her, confused. She was helping him. The enemy, the invader. She was helping him as carefully as she had helped the Ruvani. Elder Pashu watched all of this from where he sat, his broken wing arm wrapped in a splint that a human marine had made for him minutes earlier. The old Ruvani looked at the burning sky, at the human soldiers fighting and dying for people they had never met, at the human doctor saving lives without asking whose side they were on. He leaned close to a young Ruvani beside him and whispered, his voice breaking. "We called the monsters, and angels answered." The orbital battle had been raging for 3 hours, and the numbers told the story. The Gorvathi Dominion had started with 200 warships. Now they had 136. 64 ships drifted in the darkness above Vetha 4, some shattered, some burning, some dark and lifeless, spinning slowly with no power and no crew left alive. The human fleet had lost 11 ships, 11 out of 142. The gap was not just large, it was humiliating. Across the galaxy, every species with a long-range sensor was watching. The Valori, the Dumi, the Orathi, the dozens of smaller species who had never seen a real war, who had only read about human combat in intelligence reports marked classified and do not distribute. They watched the sensor data in real time, and they watched in silence, because what they were seeing did not seem possible. The Gorvathi were not weak. Their ships were well-armed, well-built, and crewed by experienced soldiers. They had conquered 11 worlds. They had defeated 3 species in open war. By every measure, they were a serious military power. The humans were taking them apart like children breaking toys. It was not just the technology, though the human weapons were devastating. It was the coordination. Every human ship seemed to know what every other human ship was doing at all times. They moved together with a kind of silent understanding that looked less like military discipline and more like instinct. When one ship attacked, 3 others were already in position to cover it. When a Gorvathi ship tried to flee, a human destroyer was already waiting where it was going to run. It was as if the entire fleet shared one mind. On the bridge of the crippled Iron Fang, Warlord Drenak stood among sparking consoles and flickering lights. His flagship had been partially repaired, enough to receive sensor data, enough to send basic commands, but it was no longer a fighting ship. He watched his fleet dying and felt his controls slipping away like sand through his claws. Sub-Commander Ulka stood behind him. Her eyes moved constantly between the tactical display and the warlord's face. She was already thinking about what came after. Drenak was finished whether he knew it or not. The question was whether she could survive what was coming. "Warlord," she said carefully, "we should consider surrender. The humans have offered." "No." Drenak's voice was a growl. His claws dug into the armrest of his command chair, scoring deep marks in the metal. "I will not kneel to Deathworlders. I will not be remembered as the warlord who ran from apes." He turned to his remaining communications officer. "Signal all ships. Activate Scorched Sky Protocol." Ulka's blood went cold. Scorched Sky was a last resort order, a command for every ship in the fleet to turn its weapons away from the enemy and fire everything at the planet below. Total destruction of the surface. It would kill the Ruvani colonists, the Gorvathi ground troops, the human marines, everyone. It would turn Vetha 4 into a burning wasteland. If Drenak could not have the planet, no one would. "Warlord, our own soldiers are on the surface." "They will die as warriors," Drenak said flatly. "Do it." The order went out. Across the remaining Gorvathi fleet, weapon systems began to reposition. Plasma cannons that had been aimed at human ships slowly turned downward, toward the planet. Energy readings spiked as dozens of weapons charged simultaneously, building toward a single devastating volley. On the Iron Wake, Lieutenant Bei Sunho saw it first. His console flashed with warning indicators, energy buildups across the Gorvathi fleet, all weapons pivoting planetward. He ran the calculations in his head and his stomach dropped. "Captain," he said, his voice tight, "they are charging for orbital bombardment. All remaining ships. They are going to glass the surface." Captain Do-hyun turned sharply. "Time to firing?" 5 minutes, maybe less. Do-hyun looked at Admiral Jisoo. She was already studying the display, her dark eyes moving across the data with a speed and focus that made her look like a machine. But she was not a machine. She was a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to protect people, and she was not going to stop now. "Formation Aegis," she said. "All capital ships, move to planetary shield position. Place our hulls between their weapons and the surface." Commander Shin Taeho hesitated for just a moment. "Admiral, at that range, we will absorb direct hits. Our ships will do their job," Jisoo said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "Move." The order went out, and the human fleet responded. The largest ships, the dreadnoughts, the heavy cruisers, the battleships, broke from their attack formations and moved into a wide arc between the Gorvathi fleet and Vetha 4. They spread out, overlapping their positions, creating a living wall of metal and armor. Behind them, the planet turned slowly, unaware of how close it was to burning. The Gorvathi fired. The first volley was enormous. Hundreds of plasma bolts and energy beams from over 100 ships, all aimed at the planet below. They hit the human ships instead. The dreadnoughts absorbed the blasts with their heavy armor, shaking but holding. The cruisers took hits that burned through outer plating and sent fire roaring through corridors. 3 destroyers, the Mokpo, the Gangnam, and the Andong, were caught in the densest part of the volley. The Mokpo took 4 direct hits in rapid succession. Its port side crumpled inward, Bulkheads collapsed. Fires broke out on 3 decks. The ship listed hard to starboard, leaking atmosphere and fuel. 14 crew members died in the first 10 seconds. The remaining crew fought to keep the ship alive, sealing breaches, putting out fires, dragging wounded friends through smoke-filled hallways. The Gangnung and the Andong took heavy damage but held their positions. They did not move. They did not retreat. They stood in the path of the fire and took the punishment that was meant for 12,000 civilians on the ground below. On the surface, Sergeant No Yeren looked up at the sky and saw the flashes. She knew what was happening. The fleet was shielding them. Human ships were taking fire so that the people on the ground could live. Her jaw tightened. Her grip on her rifle tightened. She turned back to her Marines and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. In orbit, Captain Do-hyun watched the Mokpo burning on his display. He knew people on that ship. He had trained with some of them. He felt the anger rise in his chest like a tide, hot and dark and overwhelming. But he did not let it control him. He let it sharpen him. "Admiral," he said, "permission to engage with full force." Admiral Jisoo looked at the burning ships on her screen. She looked at the planet behind them. She looked at the Gorvathi fleet, still firing, still trying to burn a world full of innocent people. "Full offensive," she said. "No more restraint. End this." The human fleet had been fighting with precision. Surgical strikes, careful targeting, controlled destruction. That was over now. Every weapon on every human ship fired at once. Railguns, missiles, energy lances, torpedo salvos, a storm of destruction that lit up the space above Vetha 4, brighter than its twin suns. The Gorvathi ships, already damaged and scattered, had no chance. Shields failed, hulls cracked, ships broke apart, spilling debris and atmosphere into the void. In 11 minutes, the Gorvathi fleet went from 136 ships to 23. The survivors were crippled, drifting, and begging for mercy on every open channel. Commander Shin Tae-ho led the boarding party onto the Iron Fang personally. He took 20 Marines through the shattered corridors of the Gorvathi flagship, stepping over wreckage and unconscious soldiers, until he reached the bridge. Warlord Drenak stood in the center of the ruined room, bleeding from a cut above his eye, his claws still gripping his command chair. Tae-ho pointed his rifle at the warlord's chest. On the ground. Now. Drenak stared at him with hate-filled eyes. For a moment, it looked like he might fight. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. Tae-ho cuffed him and dragged him to his feet. Sub-Commander Ulka contacted the human fleet moments later. Her voice was steady, professional, and completely devoid of loyalty to the warlord she had served for 6 years. "This is Sub-Commander Ulka of the Gorvathi Dominion. I am assuming command of remaining forces. We surrender unconditionally." The guns fell silent. Ambassador Leothi climbed out of the underground communication hub for the first time in 3 days. She stepped into the open air and looked up. The sky above Vetha 4 was full of human warships, hovering in silent formation like guardian spirits. On the ground around her, Marines stood watch. Medics moved among the freed colonists. Somewhere nearby, a human soldier was handing a Ruvani child a piece of chocolate. Leothi fell to her knees in the soft grass and covered her face with her hands. She had called the Deathworlders, and they had come. 7 days after the battle, Vetha 4 looked like 2 different worlds stitched together. On one side, the scars of war, craters from drop pods, burned ground from plasma fire, wreckage from Gorvathi vehicles twisted and half buried in the soil. On the other side, something new was growing. Human engineering teams worked alongside Ruvani civilians, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Walls went up. Roofs were sealed. Power lines were reconnected. The central garden, torn apart by Gorvathi boots, had been cleared and replanted with crystal flower seeds that the Ruvani had hidden during the occupation. Supply ships from Earth arrived without anyone asking for them. Massive transports carrying food, medicine, clean water systems, building materials, clothing, and tools. The crews unloaded everything with quiet efficiency, waving off any attempts at payment or thanks. When Elder Pashu tried to ask a human cargo officer how much the Ruvani owed for the supplies, the officer looked confused and said, "Nothing. You needed it. We had it. That is how it works." Pashu stared at him for a long time after that. The old Ruvani had not slept much since the battle ended. His broken wing arm was healing slowly, wrapped in a lightweight cast that Dr. Kwan Hana had made for him using human medical technology. It was better than anything the Ruvani had. The bone would heal straighter and stronger than before. Hana had told him this with a gentle smile, and Pashu had not known what to say. Everything the humans did confused him. Not because it was strange, but because it was kind. Relentlessly, stubbornly kind. They had come with warships and weapons, yes. They had fought with a violence that still made his feathers stand on end when he thought about it. But now that the fighting was over, those same soldiers were carrying Ruvani children on their shoulders, helping repair water filtration systems, and teaching anyone who was interested how to play a strange card game that involved slapping the table and laughing very loudly. Sergeant No Yeren was one of them. Her left arm was in a sling. The plasma bolt to her shoulder had done more damage than she had admitted during the battle. But she refused to stay in the medical bay. Instead, she spent her days helping clear rubble from the colony's eastern district, using her powered armor to lift pieces of wall that would have taken 10 Ruvani to move. When the work was done each day, she sat with the Ruvani guards, who were trying to establish a basic security force, and taught them simple self-defense techniques. She was patient with them. She never laughed at their thin arms or hollow bones. She simply showed them what she knew and let them learn at their own pace. The galaxy, meanwhile, was not patient at all. The news of what had happened at Vetha 4 had spread like a shockwave through the Galactic Cooperative. Every species was talking about it. A single distress call on the Deathworld frequency band had brought 142 human warships. The most powerful military fleet the galaxy had ever seen, deployed in full force for a species that humans had never met, on a world that humans had no claim to. There had been no treaty, no agreement, no alliance, no benefit, just a signal from strangers who were about to die. Some species were grateful. The smaller ones, the weaker ones, the ones who lived on the edges of known space where the cooperative's protection was thin and unreliable. They heard the story of Vetha 4 and felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. But the larger species, the powerful ones, the ones who sat on the cooperative council and made decisions about who was protected and who was not, they felt something very different: fear. Deep, cold, bone-deep fear. Because if one distress call could bring a human war fleet, what happened when the next call came? And the one after that? What did it mean that the Deathworlders could project this much force, this quickly, this far from their home? A diplomatic delegation arrived at Vetha 4 8 days after the battle. 3 cooperative council members, a Valori, a Dumi, and an Orathi, in a gleaming white diplomatic vessel that looked like a palace compared to the scarred human warships still holding orbit. They came with documents and formal language and carefully prepared questions. Admiral Yoonji Soo met them in the colony's rebuilt council chamber. She wore her dress uniform, dark navy blue with silver trim, medals on her chest, her rank insignia polished bright. She stood straight and still, her hands behind her back, and she waited. The Valori delegate spoke first. He was tall and thin, with translucent skin that shifted colors with his emotions. Right now, it was a nervous shade of yellow. "Admiral Jisoo," he began, "the Galactic Cooperative recognizes the significant military action undertaken by the United Earth Space Force in this system. We wish to understand the reasoning behind this deployment. The Ruvani are not signatories to any treaty with Earth. You had no formal obligation to respond, no economic interest, no strategic value." He paused. The room was quiet. Every eye, human, Ruvani, and alien, was on Admiral Jisoo. "Why did you come?" the Velori asked. Jisoo looked at him. Then she looked at the Duami delegate and the Orathi delegate. She looked at Elder Pashu, sitting nearby with his broken wing arm. She looked at Ambassador Liofei, who stood against the wall, with her silver-blue feathers trembling slightly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. 12,000 people were going to die. They called for help. That is the only reason we have ever needed. The silence in the room lasted a long time. The Velori delegate opened his mouth to respond, but Elder Pashu spoke first. The old Ruvani rose to his feet slowly, his broken arm held carefully against his chest. His voice was thin and rough, but it carried. "I called the cooperative first," he said. "I called every one of you. I begged. I told you what was happening. I told you we had children, we had elders, we had no way to fight. Do you know what you told me?" He looked at each delegate in turn. "You told me to wait. You told me to file reports. You told me help was coming." His voice cracked. "It was never coming. Not from you." He turned to Admiral Jisoo and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Ruvani culture, one reserved for those who had saved a life. "It came from the species you warned us to fear." The delegation had no answer for that. 2 days later, Ambassador Liofei stood before a recording device in the rebuilt communication hub, the same room where she had sent her desperate SOS into the dark. But this time, she was not begging. This time, she was testifying. She transmitted her message across the cooperative's public channels. Every station, every relay, every receiver in the galaxy could hear it. She shared her recordings, the occupation, the containment zones, the children crying, the explosives wired to kill them all. She shared the footage of human drop pods falling like fire from the sky. She shared the image of Dr. Kwan Hana treating a wounded Gorvathi soldier. She shared the video of human warships placing themselves between the planet and the bombardment, absorbing fire meant for civilians. And at the end, she spoke directly to the galaxy. "We sent an SOS to the Deathworlders. We were told they were monsters. We were told they were dangerous, violent, unpredictable. And they are. They are all of those things, but they are also the only ones who came. They came with warships, and they came with medics. They came with weapons, and they came with food. They fought for us. They bled for us. They died for us. And they asked for nothing in return." She paused. Her voice softened. "The galaxy calls them Deathworlders because of the world they come from. But I think the name is wrong. They are not creatures of death. They are creatures who have known death all their lives, on their world, in their history, in their blood. And they have decided that no one else should have to know it the way they do." The message spread across the galaxy like a wave. It was watched billions of times. It was translated into 400 languages. It sparked debates in council chambers, and arguments in cafeterias, and quiet conversations in homes on 1,000 worlds. On the bridge of the Iron Wake, Captain Han Duyan stood and watched the stars. The fleet was preparing to leave. Repairs were complete. The Gorvathi prisoners had been transferred to a cooperative custody ship. The colony was stable, rebuilding, healing. There was nothing left to do here. Sergeant No Yeren walked onto the bridge. Her arm was still in a sling, but she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had done what they came to do. She stood beside the captain and looked out at the stars with him. "Where are we headed next?" she asked. Do-hyun smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. "Wherever the next signal comes from." Yerin nodded, as if that was exactly the answer she expected. She turned and walked back to the marine deck. Admiral Jisoo gave the order. The fleet powered up, 131 ships, 11 fewer than they had arrived with. Their empty spaces a reminder of the cost. The engines hummed, navigation locked, the stars stretched. The 9th Expeditionary Warfleet jumped to faster than light, and Vetha 4 shrank behind them until it was just another point of light in the endless dark. But across the galaxy, something had changed. On a small frozen world, at the edge of Velori space, a community of miners who had been ignored by their government for decades quietly installed a new antenna on their tallest building. On a water world in the outer rim, a colony of amphibian traders pooled their savings to buy a long-range transmitter. On a dusty moon where a forgotten species tended their crops and prayed to stars that never answered, an old woman sat in her workshop and carefully, slowly, built a radio from spare parts. All of them tuned to the same frequency, the Deathworld frequency band, the channel that reached human space. They did not send messages, not yet. They simply listened, and they kept their transmitters ready.